Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and one of the first podcasts on the Internet. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1395 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The ARRL Volunteer Examiner Coordinators are ready to file 2,500-plus license applications. The Internet Archive hits over 1 trillion web pages that are archived. The HARP campaign is now on the air, focusing on HF and VLF propagation. Skywarn Recognition Day for 2025 has been canceled. The ARRL issues a call for technical manuscripts. The Radio Society of Great Britain announces an amateur radio construction project competition. Space debris in orbit is now officially becoming a problem. The Amateur Radio Digital Communications announces funding opportunities that you can apply for. Spain announces that it will be shutting down medium-wave transmitters all across the country. Job terminations and closings of labs at the Goddard Space Flight Center is causing concerns. The FCC eyes the auctioning of spectrum for enhanced wireless services, and an amateur radio group is proposing having Season Change Field Day. That would be 4 field days a year. We will tell you all about it in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will tell us a story entitled A New Year with New Services to the Public in 1905. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us back to Thanksgiving week in November of 1923 as we witness amateurs setting new records and view the Macmillan expedition to the North Pole, operating WNP, in part 1 of a series called Scooped. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and a lot more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio just outside of Albany, New York, and wishing all of our listeners the best of the Thanksgiving holiday, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in Sandwich, Illinois, where I am eagerly awaiting that first bite of turkey with a little bit of stuffing, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
And reporting from our studios in Orland Park, Illinois, where I'm home for the holidays and maybe a POTA activation or two, I'm Mike Nicolich, N9OVQ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
Coming to you from a rather nippy but still sunny Space Coast in Florida, I'm Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting this week from Cortlandville, New York, in the heart of central New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Albany, New York, in the Geek Cave studios, I'm Rich Lawrence, KB2MOB.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where we're all getting ready for Thanksgiving, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our ham radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the big game season is now open and Bruins and Bambies are being bagged, I'm Don Hulick, K2HEJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where more autumn-like weather has been promised, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
Leading off our news this week, ARRL, the National Association of Amateur Radio, reports that the FCC has extended the filing deadline to March 5, 2026 for amateur radio licenses that otherwise were due to expire from October 1, 2025 to March 5, 2026. The announcement is included in the FCC Public Notice DA 25-943, released on Monday, November 17, 2025. The news follows the recent reopening of the federal government on November 13th, following a lengthy 43-day shutdown. Since reopening, many federal agencies, including the FCC, have resumed activities, though reducing backlogs and rebounding to full operations may take some time. This includes continued delays in filing amateur radio license applications. The FCC public notice includes, for personal radio licenses, for example, amateur, ship, aircraft, GMRS, and commercial operator licenses renewal, filings originally due on October 1, 2025 through the including March 5, 2026 are now due on March 5, 2026. Further, we confirm that licensees whose license have expired and whose renewal filing deadlines have been extended above may rely on their timely renewal filing by the extended deadline to support continued operation pursuant to Section 1.62 of the Commissioner's Rules. ARRL Volunteer Examiner Coordinator Manager Maria Soma, AB1FM, explained that the announcement means that amateurs whose license expired or will expire between October 1, 2025 and March 5, 2026 may continue to operate upon completing a license renewal filing by March 5, 2026. Soma added that the FCC ULS systems are available again, which include the License Manager System, FCC License Search, and Application Search databases, as well as the CORS system. She noted, however, that the electronic batch filing is not yet available. The EBF system is used by ARRL, VEC, and all VEC organizations to file exam sessions, individual applications, and club license applications, said Soma. This means that applications for new and upgraded licenses, as well as individual and club license filings, are not being processed at this time. During the shutdown, the ARRL VEC urged its volunteer examiners to continue giving ham radio exam sessions. We have over 2,500 license applications ready to file as soon as the EBF system becomes available and fully operational, added Soma. ARRL VEC is prepared to submit a backlog of sessions and applications to FCC for issuing licenses. For ARRL VEC exam candidates who are unable to get an FCC registration number known as an FRN while the FCC course system was unavailable, please follow these steps to ensure your license application is ready to be processed promptly once the EBF system becomes operational. Number 1. Register for a CORS account using your email address as your username. 2. Verify your account, then log in and obtain your FCC registration number, FRN. Be sure to register as an individual. Enter your personal information exactly how it appears on your photo ID. Once you receive your FRN, save it carefully. This will be your permanent FCC identifier. 3. Send your name, test date, and new FRN to the ARRL VEC via email to vec@arrl.org. The nation's longest government shutdown ended with lawmakers' agreement on a bill that maintains funding for federal agencies and programs at least until January 30th, 2026, when the country could face a replay of the closure.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
In case you didn't hear, on October 22nd, 2025, the Internet Archive, who hosts the Wayback Machine at archive.org, celebrated a milestone: 1 trillion web pages archived for posterity. Founded in 1996 by Brewster Colley, the organization and its facilities grew through the late 90s. In 2001, access to their archive was greatly improved by the introduction of the Wayback Machine. From their own website on October 21st, 2009, they explained their mission and purpose. Most societies place importance on preserving artifacts of their culture and heritage. Without such artifacts, civilization has no memory and no mechanism to learn from its successes and failures. Our culture now produces more and more artifacts in digital form. The archive's mission is to help preserve those artifacts and create an internet library for researchers, historians, and scholars. We were curious about the Internet Archive technology. Storing a copy, in fact, 2 copies, of the Internet is no mean feat, so we did some digging to find out how it's done. The best information available is contained in an article from 2016 called 20,000 Hard Drives on a Mission. They keep 2 copies of every item, which are stored in Linux directories. In 2016, they had over 30 petabytes of content and were ingesting at a rate of 13 to 15 terabytes per day, web and television being the most voluminous. In 2016, they had around 20,000 individual disk drives, each housed in specialized computers called data nodes. The data nodes have 36 data drives, plus 2 operating system drives per machine. Data nodes are organized into racks of 10 machines, having 360 data drives per rack. These racks are interconnected by a high-speed Ethernet to form a storage cluster. Even though content storage tripled from 2012 to 2016, the count of disk drives stayed about the same. This is because of disk drive technology improvements. Data nodes that were once populated with 36 individual 2 terabyte drives are today filled with 8 terabyte drives, moving single node capacity from 72 terabytes to 288 terabytes, or 259.2 terabytes formatted in the same physical space. The evolution of disk density did not happen in a single step, so there are populations of 2, 3, 4, and 8 terabyte drives in the storage clusters. We will leave you with the visual styling of Hackaday Beta in 2004 and what an early Google.com or Amazon.com looked like back in the day. Super big shout out to the Internet Archive. Thanks for providing such an invaluable service to our community, and congratulations on this excellent achievement.
The High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HARP, will be conducting a research campaign November 17th through the 22nd UTC. Operating frequencies will vary, but all HARP transmissions will be between 2.75 and 10 MHz. Actual transmit days and times are highly variable based on real-time ionospheric and/or geomagnetic conditions. This campaign is being conducted in support of research proposals from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Aerospace Corporation, the University of Colorado at Denver, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, the University of Florida, Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Laboratory, the Naval Research Laboratory, and the University of Texas at San Antonio. This research is supported by the Subauroral Geophysical Observatory Award from the National Science Foundation. Scientific goals of these experiments include studies on the effects of ionospheric conditions on high-frequency radio wave propagation, generation, and propagation of extremely low-frequency/very low-frequency waves. This campaign will also introduce a Rayleigh LiDAR system as a new diagnostic tool for measuring temperature and density at an altitude of 11 through 85 kilometers. Here are a few of the frequencies that are expected to be used for these experiments. Note that these are subject to change based on real-time conditions in the ionosphere. The included transmission notice supplement contains information on the frequencies HARP is authorized to transmit. HARP transmissions will only occur on our authorized frequencies. There are no specific data collection requests from funded investigators, but reception reports are appreciated and may be submitted to our online form at haarp.gi.alaska.edu. On November 21st from 0000 to 0800 UTC on 3.25, 4.3, 5.25, and 9.6 MHz. On November 22nd from 0400 to 1100 UTC on 3.089 and 9.6 MHz.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's National Weather Service, or NWS, has announced the cancellation of Skywarn Recognition Day. The necessary time and resources required to plan a comprehensive national event for Skywarn are not available this year. Thus, the difficult decision was made to cancel this year's event. Established in 1999 by the National Weather Service and ARRL, Skywarn Recognition Day celebrates the critical contributions that Skywarn volunteers make in supporting the National Weather Service's mission to protect life and property. Amateur radio operators constitute a significant portion of these volunteers. The National Weather Service ARRL Skywarn Recognition Day National Committee extends its appreciation to all Skywarn volunteers for their dedication and service to their community and offers best wishes for a safe and happy holiday season.
Share technical insights on your field day setups and emergency communications activities. QST invites submissions of technical manuscripts from licensed amateur radio operators for upcoming issues focused on ARRL Field Day and emergency communications operations. We're looking for educational, how-to pieces that help fellow hams improve their setups, strategies, and technical know-how. What we're looking for: innovative or proven techniques for emergency preparedness and response, technical solutions for field day operations, power, antennas, logging, digital modes, etc., integration of new technologies like SDR, mesh, networking, solar power, in-field scenarios. Examples of how the popularity of Parks on the Air portable activations has changed your approach to setting up field day and emergency communication stations. Examples of how portable antennas and LifePo batteries have replaced base station antennas and generators. Manuscripts should have a strong how-to component. Tell us what you did, but more importantly, tell us how you did it. Submission guidelines. Audience, licensed amateur radio operators. The length, 1,000 to 1,800 words, plus high-resolution images with caption and photo credit information, including the name and call sign of the photographer. Tone, educational and collaborative, share that works. Format, plain text or Word document. Deadline, January 31st, 2026. Submit to qst@arrl.org. Why contribute? Your article could be published in QST, ARRL's membership journal, which reaches thousands of fellow amateurs across the country and beyond. It's a great way to give back to the community and inspire others with your experience.
After 88 years on the air, Spain's Radio Nacional de España will stop broadcasting its Rene and Radio 5 networks on medium wave AM radio as the country's public broadcaster seeks to expand its digital radio DAB+ footprint. Radio Televisión Española, or RTVE, the parent to Rene, formally announced the end of Rene AM broadcasts on November 18th. The AM broadcasts will end before December 31st, and listeners will be informed through a special campaign. Rene and Radio 5 operate on approximately 32 different AM frequencies across Spain, according to the 2025 World Radio TV Handbook. The following announcement started airing on Rene on November 14th. The voice of Pepe Fernandez, the director of its weekend morning program, said, quote, "No es un día cualquiera," was heard on the medium-wave Rene network according to a recording provided by Jorge Garzón on the Medium Wave Info blog. Medium wave technology brought us all these events, but now medium wave will cease because radio progresses as we do, the announcement translated from Spanish to English said. Now you listen to us via FM, mobile phones, smart speakers, and we are developing our own new DAB+ network. Gorka Zumeta, a Madrid-based radio and podcast consultant, reported that Spain's Ministry for Digital Transformation and Public Administration is preparing a royal decree for DAB+ implementation. The plan establishes that Rene must guarantee DAB Plus coverage for 70% of Spain's population in 2026 and 85% in 2027. Zumeta described the Rene news as a bombshell. He noted that it was unusual for a Rene on-air announcement to precede any sort of press release from Radio Televisión Española. Listenership and energy costs, Zumeta said, lightly explain Rene's decision to go forward with an AM shutdown. In 2013, Zumeta cited data that showed Rene's AM broadcasts had approximately 176,000 listeners. In the latest Estudio General de Medios survey, Rene's AM broadcasts registered only 69,000 listeners, 58,000 of them on the former Radio Uno and 11,000 on Radio Cinco Todo Noticias broadcasts, according to Zumeta.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
If you or your club are developing projects that advance amateur radio or digital communications, now is a great time to apply for Amateur Radio Digital Communications, or ARDC, grant funding, with the next application deadline on February 1st, 2026. The Foundation has been awarding grants since 2019, supporting a wide range of initiatives that strengthen and expand the amateur radio and digital communications communities. ARDC's priority areas for funding reflect the organization's broader vision and strategy for supporting experimentation, education, and open technology within the amateur radio and digital communications communities. They are especially interested in projects that align with these three areas. Research and development, open hardware and software systems that enable learning and experimentation, such as software-defined radios, open codec technologies, and new modulation techniques. Space-based communications, projects that create or expand access to satellite communications for amateur radio and digital communications, engaging communities in wireless experimentation programs such as repurposed commercial satellites and space-based tools for learning. Open source education, scalable open educational materials and hands-on projects that make amateur radio and digital communications more accessible, especially for new learners and clubs. Proposals are welcome across the full range of projects that align with these areas and remain a priority in ARDC grant-making decisions. Learn more about these priority areas and ARDC at ardc.net.
Alarm is growing among federal workers at NASA's iconic Goddard Space Flight Center's main campus in Greenbelt, Maryland, the nerve center for groundbreaking missions like the Hubble and James Webb Space Telescopes, as more than a dozen buildings on the campus are being emptied and padlocked during the federal shutdown, with very little notice to employees, said four sources who spoke to CNN on the condition of anonymity for fear of retribution. NASA's leadership has pushed back against those concerns. In one instance, furloughed employees were given just days to temporarily return to work and help empty entire buildings of highly specialized equipment, according to sources and internal emails obtained by CNN. In the communications, NASA managers wrote that equipment not moved in time, including one-of-a-kind hardware, could be thrown away or donated. In a statement, NASA spokesperson said the building closures are part of a strategic consolidation plan mapped out by Goddard leaders that should not impact ongoing projects. One document reviewed by CNN, which was compiled by more than a dozen Goddard workers concerned about the steps taken at the campus, states that 13 buildings are being shuttered, including about 100 laboratories. The roughly 1,270-acre campus includes more than 30 large buildings and dozens of smaller structures. The changes described by sources have the space agency's engineers concerned they could permanently lose access to equipment and facilities that are crucial to keeping current and future projects on track.
This story, although primarily for our Radio Society of Great Britain members listening, contains an idea almost every ham radio club should look at emulating. Whether you have only recently soldered your first wire in a kit build, or you have experience in designing an advanced software or systems engineering project, the RSGB construction competition is for you. As part of the RSGB's strategic growth priority, it wants to inspire people from different communities to find out more about amateur radio. That is why the Society has introduced a new category this year called Reimagination. If you think your project could be interesting to the maker community, or if you have an idea that could encourage people from groups such as Men's Sheds to try amateur radio, this is the category for you. If it is radio-related but motivates non-radio amateurs to find out more, the RSGB welcomes your entry. There are 6 other categories, which means there is literally something for everybody. You must be an RSGB member to enter, but you can live anywhere in the world, as entries will be judged online to allow you to participate and demonstrate your creativity remotely. The deadline for entries is March 1st, 2026.
The European Space Agency, ESA, now estimates that over 140 million pieces of space debris, each larger than 1 millimeter, are traveling in Earth's orbit at an average velocity of 7 or 8 kilometers per second. As the number of defunct and fragmented human-made objects in space rapidly increases, so do the hazards they present. This number has grown. The Tiangong Space Station core module, Tianhe, launched in 2021, was impacted by a micrometeoroid and orbital debris event within just 2 years. The impact damaged solar panels, causing a partial loss of power, necessitating 2 spacewalks for repairs and the installation of external debris protection devices. The 25-year-old International Space Station has performed more than 30 in-orbit maneuvers to avoid satellites and trackable space debris. Micrometeoroid and orbital debris damage over the years to the ISS has impacted both the Russian Progress and Soyuz vehicles, Canadarm2, and one of the 7 windows of the cupola. When the Ressur's P-1 satellite broke apart in 2024, creating more than 100 pieces of trackable debris, the ISS crew took emergency shelter in their return vehicles for over an hour.
Several well-known radio amateurs are among recipients of this year's honors from the Radio Club of America, or RCA, an organization of both professionals and amateurs that's been promoting advancements in wireless communication for more than 100 years. The awards were announced in the fall of 2025 issue of RCA Proceedings magazine. Among the amateurs recognized this year by RCA are noted contester, former RCA president, and DX Engineering CEO Tim Duffy, K3LR, the recipient of the Edgar F. Johnson Pioneer Citation for noteworthy contributions to RCA. Chester B. Scholl Jr., K3LA, receiving the Special Services Award for significant work to promote RCA's goals. Julio Ripoll, WD4R, longtime amateur radio coordinator at the National Hurricane Center, recognized for his service at WX4NHC with the Barry Goldwater Amateur Radio Award. And Dr. Christina Collins, KD8OXT, this year's recipient of the Carol Perry WB2MGP Young Professionals Award. Collins is the Chief Operations Scientist for the AMSAT Personal Space Weather Station Network. She also voices announcements heard each hour on WWV and WWVH as part of the WWV Scientific Modulation Working Group. In addition, several hams nominated as LCA Fellows, including AT&T Executive Brian Daly, WB7OML, Ham SCI founder and coordinator Dr. Nathaniel Frizzell, W2NAF, radio historian Felicia Kreutzer, KA2GXL, public safety communicator and former ARRL Western Washington Section Manager Monty Simpson, W7FF, and Angel Vasquez, WP3R, head of telescope operations for the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico. The awards will be presented at RCA's annual Technical Symposium and Awards Banquet on November 22nd in Washington, D.C.
Federal Communications Commission Chairman Brendan Carr has introduced a proposal to expand access to mid-band spectrum for future wireless technologies. The draft notice of proposed rulemaking seeks public input on auctioning as much as 180 megahertz of spectrum in the 3.98 to 4.2 gigahertz range known as upper C-band for use in 5G and upcoming 6G networks. Chairman Carr stated, "Restoring America's leadership position is important. After all, freeing up spectrum drives down prices for consumers, creates jobs, and increases competition. It also plays a vital role in promoting our national security and geopolitical interests." He continued, "We've seen how the lower C-band powers in-home and high-speed mobile broadband across the country. So it is now time to start making important decisions on how best to unleash new wireless services quickly in the band." The proposal is part of a broader initiative to strengthen U.S. leadership in wireless innovation while maintaining aviation safety standards in adjacent frequencies. The Commission plans to vote on the proposal at its November open meeting.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
The Digital Library of Amateur Radio and Communications recently added publications provided by AMSAT from 1969 through 2013 to the Internet Archive. These include the vast majority of issues of the AMSAT newsletter, AMSAT Satellite Report, AMSAT's Orbit magazine, and the AMSAT Journal for that time period. The Digital Library of Amateur Radio and Communications is a library of materials and collections related to amateur radio and early communications. The DLARC is funded by a significant grant from Amateur Radio Digital Communications, a private foundation, to create a digital library that documents, preserves, and provides open access to the history of this community.
In the UK, Ofcom has agreed to the Radio Society of Great Britain's request to extend the 146 to 147 megahertz NOV for a further year. It is available on a non-interference basis, and the NOV is subject to a 30-day notice period of change or withdrawal. Ofcom's objective in allocating this new part of the spectrum is to encourage amateurs to experiment and test new communication schemes and systems. The RSGB VHF manager would therefore welcome reports of innovative use of the spectrum to support future discussions via the email vhf.manager@rsgb.org.uk. Full license holders can apply for the 146 through 147 megahertz NOV on the RSGB website.
Hello, and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. I hope you've been tuning around the bands this past week. It won't be long until sunspots start to decline, and you will long for the days of openings like we've been having now. Also, stay tuned next week for an announcement about a way you can learn some tips and tricks for finding and logging great DX. Each week, I try to focus on those entities that will be available in the next 7 days. There's so much data to sift through that I thought a focus on the next week might be helpful. Here's what you should find QRV when you tune the bands. The following information is from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just do what several other listeners have done. Shoot me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com, and I'll get you fixed up. Well, first, we have a lot of activity coming up in Uganda, 5 X-ray. Here's the information. SM0 HPL Anders will go back to Nyala just outside of Kampala soon and operate as 5 X-ray 7 Whiskey, if he can get his license. He's been trying to get through the country's new online application system. Besides day-to-day operations, Anders will make a serious attempt in the CQ Worldwide DX context, CW as a single operator, all-band, QRP effort. His activity will be on 80 through 10 meter CW, FT4 and FT8 through December 8th. QSOs will be uploaded to Clublog and LOTW, and you can QSL his operation via M0 Oscar X-Ray Oscar. Don, G3XTT, will return to Uganda for the CQ Worldwide DX contest also. having had to cut his trip short last year for a domestic emergency. He will be entering the contest as 5 X-Ray 1 Delta Fox, single operator, single band, which will be 40 meters, high power. And you can QSL G3XTT's operation via his call or club log. And finally, G3XAQ Allen will again be on as 5 X-Ray 1 X-Ray Alpha from Barenga near Kampala, November 17th through December 3rd. Mostly CW with perhaps some FT8, he says. He will be on in the CQ Worldwide DX contest, CW, probably single band, 15 meters. QSL direct only to Golf 3, Sierra Whiskey Hotel, or use LOTW. So you have at least 2 entries in the CQ Worldwide DX CW that's coming up that are single band, 40 and 15. So check your needs, and if you need them, get those guys in the log. We have information on a rare IOTA DXpedition to Playa Blanca, which is SA084. And the call sign is Hotel Kilo 4 stroke Papa Yankee 8 Whiskey Whiskey. Renato has mounted an IOTA DXpedition to Playa Blanca, which is part of Colombia's Choco Department South Group. He had requested the call sign 5 Juliet 4 Whiskey, but his request was denied, so he's using the Hotel Kilo 4 stroke Papa Yankee 8 Whiskey Whiskey instead. Renato is QRV, quote, with good openings for the U.S. and Europe on 15 meters, even with low power, end quote. He's operating 80 through 10 meter CW, sideband, and digital modes. And this is another example of, even if you're not into IOTA right now, when you hear one that comes on that's particularly rare, it might be worth working it just to get it in the log, and someday when you actually start chasing IOTA, you'll be glad you did. So here's some details on a DXpedition to Cambodia that should be QRV by now. The X-Ray United 7 Romeo Charlie IOTA DXpedition is QRV until December 3rd and is proceeding as planned with updates to be provided to the DX community via their website. Wikipedia describes Koh-Ta Kiev as, quote, the biggest of a small group of Cambodian islands situated 4 kilometers off Otres Beach in Sihanoukville City as 1 kilometer off the coast of Reem National Park, end quote. So there's another one. Get them in the log. And then we have Benin, Tango Yankee. Red, Delta Lima 1 Bravo Uniform Golf, plans to be in Cotonou, where he will operate as TY5 Fox Radio. He will utilize an IC7300 transceiver and a CJ3000 auto tuner, running 100 watts into either a 40-meter wire or a G5 RV antenna. He is QRV using CW and sideband across 80 to 10 meters until December 7th. This period includes participation in the CQ Worldwide DX CW contest as a single operator, all band, low power entry. All QSOs will be uploaded to Club Log. QSLs may be sent direct or via the Bureau to Delta Lima 1 Bravo Uniform Golf. Zulu Delta 7 St. Helena. G3AB, also known as 5 Zulu 4 Victor Juliet, Andy, will be departing Johannesburg, South Africa on Friday, November 21st, headed to St. Helena Island. So hopefully by the time you hear this, he's on his way. He'll be there and active as Zulu Delta 7 Victor Juliet from November 22nd to December 7th, including the CQ Worldwide DXCW contest. Then we have an update from the Chatham Islands, which is ZL7. Holger, ZL3I, is returning to the Chatham Islands and will be operating as ZL7IO. He plans to participate in the CQ Worldwide DX CW contest as a single operator, all band, utilizing a newly installed solar system with increased capacity. His stay is scheduled from November 24th until December 4th. And we have an update from Burundi, 9 Uniform 1 Radio Uniform. And this is from Tuesday, November 18th. Quote, our latest club log upload puts us at just over 165,000 QSOs with 2 days remaining in our operation. We are hoping these last 2 days we can reach 175,000 before we QRT. Isn't that amazing? 175,000 QSOs. For our next 2 nights, we will be focusing on low bands, operating FT8 on 160 and 80 on the normal frequencies. On the 17th, we had a problem throughout the day with loss of commercial power and have already experienced this again this morning. We have lost power for a brief time. As a reminder, if we suddenly disappear on phone and CW, it is likely that we have lost our electrical power. QRX, and we may be back soon, or we may be back later, but continue to stand by. The 8 remaining team members are all doing well. The staff here at our Hotel QTH treated us well. but we are all anxious to get back home in the next few days. Again, thanks to the DX community for your support and for all the contacts. 7-3, and that's from 9 Uniform 1 Radio Uniform, the DXpedition team. The DX Mentor features a new YouTube episode this weekend, a discussion with young op Pia DL7PIA. Pia is one of the youngest hands to win the CQ Marathon contest in Europe in 2024. She is also an accomplished contester, POTA operator, violinist, pianist. You get the idea. Check it out and let me know what you think. Not to be confused, 2 weeks ago, the podcast version dropped. This is the YouTube version. If you want to follow all of the latest DX podcasts and YouTube releases, you should check out the DX Mentor Facebook page and subscribe to be kept up to date on all of the DX activities. So here's a quick contest update, and you've heard so much about it already in the last 8 or 9 minutes. CQWWCW. At the end of the month, you will be able to participate in the CQ Worldwide CW contest sponsored by CQ. The dates are the 25th and 26th of November. Details can be found at www.cqww.com. This is my favorite contest and by far the one I'm most active in. I hope to work you in this contest. Until next week, this is Bill, AJ8B, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups. Have a great DX week.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Welcome to the 47th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Hams, organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our thanks go out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for granting us permission to use his website as we prepare these segments. Now, ride along with us as we present this next chapter of Ham Radio History. Scooped. On the evening of 27 November 1923, a mother in Connecticut sent Thanksgiving greetings to her son, who was a great distance away, via radio. She paid nothing for this service, since her message was handled entirely by amateur radio operators. Impressively, it arrived only 6 minutes after she dictated it to a local ham on the telephone, traveling more than 6,000 miles to reach its addressee. Since her son happened to be aboard a ship that was frozen motionless in ice 700 miles from the North Pole, amateur radio was really the only way to convey such a greeting. Her message had traveled from Bristol, Connecticut, via Catalina Island, California, to Eta, Greenland, where the Macmillan expedition received it via its amateur radio station, WNP. Dom Mix's mom had participated in setting a new relay record, albeit one that lasted for only a day. The following night, the same group was at it again. 1XAQ in Bristol sent a message to WNP via 6XAD on Catalina, a specially licensed 100-meter station owned by Lawrence Mott, 6ZW, and received an acknowledgement 5 minutes and 6 seconds after starting the message. This was now the longest three-station round-trip relay, 12,300 miles, and the fastest, traveling at 2,412 miles per minute. QST mistakenly printed it as miles per hour in the summary box, though fast for transportation, that would be quite slow for radio. This three-station relay circuit operated fairly reliably for more than a week. The morning before Mrs. Mix's Thanksgiving message, another milestone was reached. Deloy at French 8AB sent a message addressed to WNP to 1XAM, John Reinhardt's experimental station, who telephoned it to 1HX, who then passed it to 6XAD as before. But since WNP was not on the air at the time, 6XAD passed it along to Barnsley at Canadian 9BP, who got it to WNP the following night. Though not a speed or distance record, it was the first for-country relay. In December, a group operating PA9, the first amateur radio transmitter in the Netherlands, specially licensed for the 4th transatlantic tests of late 1923, was soliciting 100-meter tests with American amateurs. Those in Belgium and Italy awaited authorization and expected it soon as well. It seems assured that this is but the forerunner of regular transatlantic operation, predicted ARRL Secretary Kenneth Warner accurately. Oh, for the pen of a Wells to picture the possibilities opened to amateur radio on both sides of the Atlantic, now that we are QSO, he added, referring to science fiction writer H.G. Wells. That the Deloy-Schnell QSO was no fluke was quickly becoming clear to everyone. Just a few weeks after the breathless reporting of that first transatlantic amateur contact, several others made it seem routine. 4 British stations, another French station, and one in the Netherlands all worked the U.S., with at least 9 U.S. stations making contact. And the Europeans were heard by many more amateurs in the U.S. this time, as far west as the Pacific coast. Amateurs at last began to turn their attention away from 200 meters and down to shorter wavelengths. Warner observed that old-time amateurs who thought they had exhausted every thrill of the game are returning now to tackle Europe. The first U.S.-UK QSO was made by Warner himself, operating at Schnell's station, 1MO, now referred to as U1MO, using the new unofficial intermediate U as a prefix. He worked London amateur J.A. Partridge, G2KF, aided by Deloy at F8AB in the early morning hours of 8 December, well past sunrise in London, which made it an astonishing feat. A surprising feature of the communication was that as dawn wore on the other side, signals at 1MO became somewhat better, he wrote. Even when using vacuum tube audio amplification, hams continued the practice of expressing signal strength this way, a throwback to the days of crystal reception. Several other UK-US QSOs followed on subsequent nights. The second station in France to make contact across the ocean was F8BF with U1MO on 16 December, again with the aid of Deloy at F8AB. The first QSO with Holland followed next with U2AGB, following Dutch station PCH on 27 December, receiving a message for ARRL. U2AGB now held the record for most stations worked in Europe, with 6 QSOs in 3 countries. Deloy was copied as far as the Pacific Northwest. In fact, F8AB was the most often copied European station, often readable 25 feet from the loudspeaker. Now in regular contact, U1MO and F8AB lost track of the number of QSOs they'd completed and had passed more than 50 messages. All of the new QSOs were made in a range between 108 and 118 meters wavelength. Probably we went through so many years of vain struggling for contact with Europe simply waiting for a Deloy and a Schnell to try it on the shorter waves, remarked Warner with unnecessary equivocation. He did not quite understand why using shorter wavelengths mattered, pondering, radiation at the higher frequencies is somewhat better, it is true, but not enough of itself to account for the difference. QRM is less, it is true, but that can account for it. He chose at this point to agree with the theory that simply using an aerial cut to a length much longer than its fundamental wavelength resulted in this benefit. If we built special small aerials for 100 meters, we would be no better off than in the past years on 200 meters, he wrote. The steadiness of the shortwave signals was also quite surprising, but apparently not yet convincing enough. Expert opinions abounded in an effort to explain the successes at 100 meters. QST technical editor Robert S. Cruz took them on in rapid succession. First, it was not because of lower QRM. He pointed out that there was plenty of 100-meter QRM in the Hartford area from KDKA's shortwave broadcasts and from the harmonics from very many lower-frequency stations, including U6PL, who was completely inaudible in Connecticut on its primary wavelength. Other broadcast harmonics were troublesome too, including WOR in New York, which was a nuisance because of its wavering nature, as were the signals of various commercial spark stations. He also attributed success to using aerials that were much longer than their natural wavelength, which usually involved tuning them with series capacitors. Cruz debunked ideas that such capacitors cause loss, saying that they do not get hot, so they could not be lossy, and yes, the resistance increases, but it's radiation resistance, something good. That was Lesson 1. Lesson 2 was to get down below 200 meters. Even without an experimental license, hams could operate at 150. The third was to make a wave meter so that you can know where you're operating. That was how Schnell and Deloy had done it, he asserted. Among the messages Warner and Deloy handled was this one from Maxim sent to Marconi on 11 December 1923. Hartford, December 11, Marconi, London. American Radio Relay League presents its respects and this evidence of dawn of international amateur radio. Hiram Percy Maxim. Marconi's reply came back via commercial wireless. London, December 17, Maxim Relay League, Hartford, Connecticut. Please accept my thanks and appreciation which I offer you and all concerned for your cordial message transmitted and received by amateur stations. Marconi. Another pair was exchanged between Maxim and Eccles, G2GF, president of RSGB, a few days later. We'll continue this segment next week. Included in this material are quotes from the following. New Worlds Relay Records, QST, January 1924, page 18. Kenneth B. Warner, The Progress of Transatlantic Communication, QST, February 1924, page 15. S. Cruz, What the Work with F8AB Teaches the ARRL, QST, February 1924, page 32. With appreciation to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, in the preparation of this segment, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a stream to your favorite digital device on Spotify, TuneIn.com, Overcast, iHeartMedia, and wherever you download your podcasts.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Recently, I spent some quality time digging into the origins of a word in common use. In doing so, I contacted the Postal Museum in the United Kingdom and received a lovely reply that included a photo of a document in their archive. The document, a post office circular from Friday, December 30th, 1904, number 1641, introduces a new service offered by the post office. Let me read to you what it says, and I quote, "Telegrams to and from ships by wireless telegraphy, to be noted at telegraph offices only. With the present circular is enclosed a list showing the wireless telegraph stations in the United Kingdom worked on the Marconi Company system, and the hours up to which telegrams can be received at those stations for transmission by wireless telegraphy to certain ships fitted with Marconi apparatus. By another notice in this circular, postmasters and others concerned are requested to enter the names of the stations in the code book with the necessary particulars. Ships will be issued for insertion in the Post Office Guide. On and from the 1st January 1905, telegrams may be accepted from the public on the following conditions. Subject to the inland regulations with regard to counting, the charge, which must be prepaid in the usual way by means of stamps, will be at the rate of 6.5 pence a word, with a minimum of 6.5 shillings per telegram. The name of the wireless station will in each case pass as one word in the address. the word radio, which is not charged for, should be telegraphed in the service instructions." End quote. When I read that, it made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. The introduction of a wireless telegram service under the service heading of radio, with a photo of the actual document that introduced it into the world. I also learned that there's a dozen pennies in a shilling, and over the years before decimalisation in 1971, the composition of coins changed, which made converting this into today's money interesting. As an aside, the Royal Society has a wonderful article, "The Science of Money, Isaac Newton's Mastering of the Mint." Back to radio. This is 1904 bleeding-edge technology, and it's priced accordingly. The starting price for a radio telegram on New Year's Day 1905, 6 bob and 6, or 3 florin and 6pence, or a crown, a bob and a tanner, is worth just over 34 Great British pounds today. That's just on $45 or nearly 69 Australian dollars. That's the minimum price. The price per word, 6pence halfpenny, is just over 2 Great British pounds today, nearly $4 or almost 6 Australian dollars. Compare that to the price of SMS, which started at about 21 cents here in Australia. Today it's about 3 cents per message of 160 characters. This seems like a lucrative business to be in, but I digress. Again, from my current and ongoing research, it appears that until this point, the early 1900s, the word radio was always accompanied by another word. For example, in this context, radiotelegraphy. Another combination of the day is radioactive, as well as radiotellurium, which today we know as polonium. Moving on, the response I received from the Postal Museum included other gems, including a reference to the 1904 Wireless Telegraphy Act, from the 15th of August 1904, where I found something fascinating from Section 2, Paragraph 1. Quote, "Where the applicant for a license proves to the satisfaction of the Postmaster General that the sole object of obtaining the license is to enable him to conduct experiments in wireless telegraphy, a license for that purpose shall be granted, subject to such special terms, conditions, and restrictions as the Postmaster General may think proper, but shall not be subject to any rent or royalty." End quote. I think that's the birth of amateur radio licensing in the United Kingdom right there. As an aside, because I cannot help myself, the definition of the expression wireless telegraphy is pretty interesting too, reminding me of a quote, variations going back to at least 1866, incorrectly attributed to Einstein, that goes something like this. "You see, wire telegraph is a kind of very, very long cat. You pull his tail in New York and his head is meowing in Los Angeles. Do you understand this? And radio operates exactly the same way. You send signals here, they receive them there. The only difference is that there is no cat." Seems that the drafters of the 1904 Wireless Telegraphy Act had the same thing in mind when they wrote, quote, "The expression wireless telegraphy means any system of communication by telegraph as defined in the Telegraph Acts 1863 to 1904, without the aid of any wire connecting the points from and at which the messages or other communications are sent and received." End quote. Now, as I said, I'm still working on this because the word radio as a concept had to have been conceived before the Post Office circular was written, printed and published. It might transpire that this was the brainchild of a single individual, or it might be that this was a term whose time had arrived, or this might not be the first occurrence of the word radio as a concept. Today we think nothing of it when we use it to turn on the radio, listen to or talk on the radio, radio for help, break radio silence, and plenty of other uses of this now ubiquitous word. Thanks again to the Postal Museum for finding and photographing the Post Office circular for the 30th of December 1904, which at this stage appears to be the first occurrence of the word radio on its own, and for referring me to the 1904 Wireless Telegraphy Act, which appears to be the birth of amateur radio in the United Kingdom. You can find both documents on my project site at vk6flab.com. I should also mention the brave individuals who took the time to share with me how to refer to Old British money. Any mistakes are all mine. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
The ARRL has published its 2024 annual report. Included is a summary of the July 2024 decision made by the ARRL Board of Directors to approve a strategic direction, adding inspiring and educating youth as a third advocacy priority, alongside ARRL's longstanding commitments to promoting and protecting amateur radio. Also included is ARRL's report to America, which recognizes the contributions of radio amateurs, particularly those involved with the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, in supporting emergency response efforts during various natural disasters. The report concludes with copies of the 2024 and 2023 financial statements and an independent auditor's report. In other ARRL news, there are open positions at the League. Come join the headquarters staff of ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio. We are currently seeking qualified applicants for the following positions: Membership Manager, Senior RFI Lab Engineer, Public Relations and Outreach Manager, and Purchasing Associate. Full details may be found on the ARRL HR webpage at www.arrl.org/careers.
In 2022, AMSAT rolled out its community-based youth initiative program, which provides age-appropriate lessons about satellites for youngsters in two age groups, grades 5 through 7 and grades 8 through 12. In the first year, a grant from the Quarter Century Wireless Association helped get things going. 3 years later, as the initiative gathers even more momentum, Amateur Radio Digital Communication has announced that it is providing the initiative with 2 grants designed to enhance both of the student group's learning experiences. One grant will allow production of a coloring book for the younger students, who are of elementary school age. The pages will depict satellites being used to aid in pollution control, wildfire fighting, broadcasting, and navigation. The other grant will help secure more software licenses for online courses for the older students, who are of high school age. The first course is called Introduction to Satellite Meteorology, and visitors to Hamvention this past spring got a preview of its contents. Central to the initiative are its 2 websites, KidsSat and BuzzSat, which contain age-appropriate activities for the younger and older students, respectively. The students also have access to a network of online software-defined radios that they can use as ground stations for receiving images and telemetry from satellites making passes overhead.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. A few weeks ago, we spoke about a Japanese satellite, BOTAN. It has been operational. It has an APRS Digipeater on 146.825 MHz. It was originally programmed to operate for 12 hours after activation. However, it turns out to only be operating for 8 hours. What this means is that when the Japanese ground station activates the Digipeater, by the time it reaches parts of North America, it is about to turn off. So that some of North America, Asia, Australia, Africa, Europe, and South America can gather data and use the APRS Digipeater, the satellite was commanded to turn on a bit later than when it was over Japan. Hopefully, there will be more passes where the satellite is activated later. As we're talking about APRS has been suspended on the ISS as they are doing a 25th anniversary project sending SSTV on 145.800 MHz. APRS on 146.825 MHz will resume November 20th. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time once again for our weekly look at solar weather and the terrestrial propagation report. Solar activity has remained low this past week. The largest flare was AC 9.9 on November 19 from a region just beyond the northeast limb near N17. Region 4284 grew slightly in the early part of the period, but was in decay after November 19. New region 4287 was numbered. A Type 2 radio sweep estimated at 695 km per second was observed on November 19 at 22:15 UTC. It was likely associated with a B9.0 flare from just beyond the east limb. No Earth-directed coronal mass ejections were observed. Solar activity is expected to be at low levels, with slight chance for minor or moderate flares on November 19 through the 21st. Solar wind parameters were at nominal levels. Solar wind speed ranged from 346 to 421 km per second. The phi angle was predominantly negative. By late November 20th, a negative polarity coronal hole high-speed stream is expected to become geo-effective, causing a minor enhancement in the solar wind. High-speed stream activity is expected to continue into November 21st and wane through November 22nd. Solar wind speeds in the 450 to 550 km per second range are likely based on recurrent values. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the vocap online for ham radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week, November 26th, the SKCC Sprint, that's CW. Also on November 26th, the UKE ICC 80-meter contest, that is CW as well. November 27th, the RSGB 80-meter Autumn Series, CW. November 29th through the 30th, the CQ Worldwide DX contest, that's CW. On December 2nd, the ARS Spartan Sprint, CW. December 4th, QRP ARCI Top Band Sprint Contest, that's CW. November 4th through the 5th, the Walk for the Bacon QRP Contest, CW there. Also on December 4th, the NRAU 10-meter Activity Contest, CW Phone and Digital, and the SKCC Sprint Europe, CW. On December 5th, the NCCC FT4 Sprint, that's digital. Also on December 5th, the weekly RTTY test, that's digital. And on December 5th through the 7th, the ARRL 160-meter contest, that is CW. Remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and divisional conventions, December 12th through the 13th, the Tampa Bay Ham Fest hosting the ARRL West Central Florida Section Convention, that's in Plant City, Florida. January 10th, Ham Radio University, ARRL New York City Long Island Section Convention, that's in Brookville, New York. January 16th through the 17th, the Southwest Florida Regional Ham Fest, that's the ARRL Southern Florida Convention, and that's in Fort Myers, Florida. And on January 30th through the 31st, the Jackson MS Capital City Ham Fest, ARRL Mississippi State Convention, that's in Jackson, Mississippi. And remember to search the ARRL Ham Fest and Convention database to find more events in your area. The Hunt Valley, Maryland Amateur Radio Club of the National Electronics Museum will commemorate 2025 Pearl Harbor Day and the role of electronics in World War II, December 1st to the 11th, 1300 Zulu to 2200 Zulu. Primary operation will be December 1st to the 7th, with additional operation possible December 8th through the 11th, as operator availability permits. Special Event Station W2W will operate on 14.241, 14.041, 7.241, and 7.041 MHz. Operation on 80 meters, 3.541 and 3.841 MHz, and digital modes is possible during that event. Also, a certificate will be available.
On November 7, 2025, the Attorneys General of 19 U.S. states and the Corporation Counsel for New York City submitted a letter to the Federal Communications Commission demanding that it publish a report and order that was adopted back on January 8, 2025. As described in the letter, the report and order would expand the FCC's Wireless Emergency Alerts, or WEA system, to include alerts in American Sign Language, or ASL, and the 13 most spoken languages in the United States after English. The WEA system is used to send alerts regarding emergencies, like natural disasters and extreme weather events, to mobile devices located in the United States. Prior to this order, the WEA system had only supported messages in English and Spanish. The Federal Communications Commission is responsible for regulating U.S. interstate and international communications. The agency is overseen by Congress and led by 5 commissioners appointed by the President. In general, the FCC issues a report and order when responding to public comments and adopting a decision about a proposed rule change as part of its rulemaking process. At the time of this writing, the FCC has so far failed to publish the January 8, 2025 order in the Federal Register. The report and order in question is titled Wireless Emergency Alerts, Amendments to Part 11 of the Commission's Rules Regarding the Emergency Alert System, and is referred to in the letter as the Multilingual Alerts Order. The letter highlights the fact that commercial mobile service providers participating in the WEA program will have a 30-month period to comply with the order. However, that compliance period only begins when the order is published in the Federal Register. Nick Brown, the Attorney General for the state of Washington, was quoted in a press release saying, "In a disaster or other emergency, people need to be able to access critical information about how to keep themselves and their families safe, regardless of the language they speak and read at home. The law is clear. The FCC can't refuse to publish its own rules." The authors of the letter are threatening to take appropriate legal action against the FCC if they fail to publish the multilingual alerts order within 30 days of receiving the letter. The English template texts for the 18 alert messages were created by the Bureau, and the translation were developed through a contracted professional translation service for Arabic, Chinese, both traditional and simplified, French, German, Haitian Creole, Hindi, Italian, Korean, Brazilian, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, Tagalog, Vietnamese, and American Sign Language, ASL. An exception to this requirement was made for the ASL templates, which will be provided as video files but will not include the fillable fields. The order also states that all alert messages using one of the non-English templates will have to be followed by the English version as an important public safety redundancy, and to ensure that individuals with legacy devices that cannot display multilingual alerts at least receive the English message.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
After terrestrial weather forced Blue Origin to scrub its Sunday attempt to launch its 98-meter-tall New Glenn rocket, unacceptable space weather prevented a launch attempt on Wednesday from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. In a post on social media, the company said NASA made the call to stand down due to highly elevated solar activity and its potential effects on the Escapade spacecraft. On Tuesday afternoon, NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center forecast a G4 severe watch connected to a coronal mass ejection first detected on Sunday, November 9th. It noted that this is just the 4th G4 watch issued this solar cycle, making it very rare, and added that impacts were expected about midday on November 12th. The severe G4 geomagnetic storm lit up skies across the northern hemisphere overnight on November 11th and 12th, with vivid northern lights visible across Canada, the United States, and as far south as Mexico. The incredible display followed the arrival of multiple coronal mass ejections, eruptions of magnetic field and plasma from the Sun, launched by sunspot AR4274, one of the most energetic sunspot groups in the current solar cycle. The ongoing storm ranks among the strongest of solar cycle 25. This particular CME clocked in as the third strongest geomagnetic storm this solar cycle. The first of 2 CMEs struck in quick succession, compressing Earth's magnetic field and unleashing spectacular aurora shows that lasted well into the night. Blue Origin finally launched its second heavy-lift New Glenn rocket Thursday, November 13th, putting 2 small NASA satellites onto a long looping course to Mars to learn more about how the sun has slowly blown away the red planet's once thick atmosphere.
The U.S. Space Agency, NASA, is taking a close look at the serious damage that disabled the largest antenna at its Deep Space Network site in California 2 months ago. The 230-foot antenna, which tracks near-Earth asteroids and communicates with NASA's interplanetary spacecraft, has been out of service since September 16th. The antenna suffered an excessive rotation that strained its cabling and piping and damaged its fire suppression systems, which led to water damage and flooding, according to a report on the Gizmodo website. The damaged antenna, prized for its sensitivity, received its first signal in 1966 from NASA's Mariner 4 mission. In preparation for Voyager 2's mission toward Neptune, NASA upgraded the antenna's width from 210 feet, or 64 meters, to 230 feet, or 70 meters. It communicated as well with Voyager 1 in 2012, following the spacecraft's entry into interstellar space. Meanwhile, NASA relies on 2 other deep space communication antennas. They are located in Madrid, Spain, and near Canberra, Australia.
NASA's James Webb Space Telescope, or JWST, has received a remarkable upgrade, not from astronauts or hardware, but from artificial intelligence. Researchers at the University of Sydney developed a software-based solution that corrected subtle image blurring in one of JWST's most sensitive instruments, restoring the telescope's precision without the need for any on-orbit servicing mission. The issue affected JWST's aperture masking interferometer, a specialized instrument designed to resolve extremely fine features when observing stars and exoplanets. Soon after operations began, scientists noticed faint distortions caused by tiny electronic effects within the infrared detector. Rather than planning a complex repair mission, similar to how astronauts serviced the Hubble Space Telescope decades ago, the team pursued a software-only approach. 2 PhD researchers, Louis de Goy and Max Charles, created a new calibration system called Amigo that uses artificial intelligence to model the behavior of JWST's detector in space. By correcting a phenomenon known as the brighter, fatter effect, where electrical charge slightly spreads between pixels, their software restored AMI's ability to produce extremely sharp, high-contrast images from millions of miles away. With the correction applied, JWST has achieved sharper-than-ever detections of faint and closely orbiting objects. The team demonstrated improved imaging of a dim exoplanet and a brown dwarf companion orbiting the near star HD 206893, about 133 light-years from Earth. Additional examples included high-resolution observations of Io's volcanic surface, a Wolf-Rayet star system, and a distant black hole jet, confirming that the fix significantly boosts scientific capability. The effort highlights a growing era where software and artificial intelligence can enhance or even repair spacecraft from the ground. Instead of sending astronauts to bolt on new parts, they managed to fix things with code, said Professor Peter Tuthill of the University of Sydney, whose group originally contributed the AMI instrument design for the spacecraft. The achievement underscores both the telescope's flexibility and Australia's strong role in cutting-edge astronomical instrumentation. The research has now been publicly released and peer review is underway. The software tools are being prepared for use by the broader JWST science community, ensuring the telescope continues delivering unmatched views of the universe, all thanks to a clever fix developed on Earth with no spacewalks or hardware intervention required.
BOTAN, a 1U CubeSat built by students of the Chiba Institute of Technology in Japan, was deployed from the International Space Station on October 10th via the Japanese Space Agency Kubo module. The satellite carries a Earth observation camera downloading images upon ground station command at 437.375 MHz. These downloads occur primarily when the satellite is over Japan. BOTAN also carries an APRS Digipeater operating on 146.825 MHz. The Digipeater is also activated by ground station command. Although the original design specifications called for the Digipeater to remain active for 720 minutes, or 12 hours after activation, observations have shown that it is currently timing out after 480 minutes, or 8 hours. As a result, when the Digipeater is activated by the command station in Japan, it has timed out before passing over portions of North America. Although the Chiba Institute has asked amateurs around the world for telemetry downloads, the attempts to make use of these satellite services have been frustrating for North American amateurs.
Finding, collecting, and restoring vintage tech is the rewarding pastime of many in the amateur radio hobby. Working with old school gear can be tough, though, when documentation or supporting resources are hard to find. If you're in need of an old manual or a little scrap of software, you might find the Vintage Technology Digital Archive, the VTDA, a useful destination to add to your vintage tech arsenal. The VTDA is a simple website. There's no search function or fancy graphical way to browse the resources on offer. Instead, it's merely a collection of files and a well-ordered directory tree. Click through and you'll find a collection of high-resolution scans of various old diskettes and their packaging. Other dictionary trees will give you all kinds of useful documentation, from press releases to datasheets for printers long forgotten. You can even find Heathkit schematics and old Windows boot images if you dive into the depths. While it doesn't have everything by any means, the VTDA has lots of interesting little bits and pieces that you might not find anywhere else. It's a great counterpart to other archival efforts out on the web, particularly if you're a member of the Retro Computing Massive.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
The recent saga of AM and FM radio in cars usually comes down to whether or not it is included as an option or eliminated due to electric interference within the vehicle. But a new cease and desist letter issued by Neil Ardman, the owner of Georgia-based radio company NEA Broadcasting, highlights the potential visual alteration of metadata sent by stations, including via RDS and HD radio. It stems from what he has observed in his own Porsche Taycan GTS, which is manufactured by Volkswagen. Display data sent from his stations via RDS and HD, including the HD radio artist experience, is supported by what he said is its own onboard metadata service. As an example, last month a 15-year-old in Kingsland, Georgia went missing, which is where Ardman's 106.3 WKBX FM K-Bay 106 is located. He said the station ran the boy's picture via HD Radio's Artist Experience feature in conjunction with the Camden County Sheriff's Office. He said the boy's picture showed up on most auto displays, but not on the Porsche Taycans. The Porsche's metadata, Ardman said, often will attempt to match up currently playing artist and song title data to its own database, which he cited is often either inaccurate or outdated. Ardman's stations also work with advertisers to sell spots over metadata. Those ads are not seen on the Porsche's display either. It's a slippery slope, Ardman told Radio World. Do automotive OEMs get to pick and choose which ads are sent out on the display? How is it any different than if a TV manufacturer decided to cover up certain advertisements on a television program? He is also concerned as his stations, which include coastal Georgia's WKBX and WTMP AM and FM in the Tampa-St. Petersburg area, won't be able to disseminate weather data via HD radio and RDS efficiently.
The 2025 CQ Worldwide DX contest on CW is November 29th and 30th. The CQ Worldwide is the largest amateur radio competition in the world. Over 35,000 participants take to the airwaves on the last weekend of October on SSB and November on CW, with the goal of making as many contacts with as many different DXCC entities and CQ zones as possible. Online certificates are available for recent CQ Worldwide contests. Use the search to find your call in the database, then click on the CERT link to view the certificate in PDF format. Meanwhile, the Hunt Valley, Maryland Amateur Radio Club of the National Electronics Museum will commemorate 2025 Pearl Harbor Day and the role of electronics in World War II December 1st through the 11th from 1300 to 2200 UTC. Primary operation will be December 1st through the 7th, with additional operation possible December 8th through the 11th as operator availability permits. Special Event Station W2W will operate on 14.241, 14.041, 7.241, and 7.041 MHz. Operation on 80 meters, 3.541 and 3.841 MHz, and digital modes is possible during the event. A display certificate will be available via a self-addressed stamped envelope.
As the Federal Communications Commission catches up on pending matters since the U.S. government shutdown, its Enforcement Bureau announced it has agreed to a consent decree with Robert Bellinger, an unlicensed radio operator on Cape Cod. The agreement results in his voluntary contribution of $7,200, payable to the U.S. Department of Treasury. Bellinger was found to be operating a pirate radio station on 93.1 FM from Cotuit, Massachusetts, a village in the town of Barnstable, about halfway between Falmouth and Hyannis. The signal, known as Three Bays Radio, also had an online Facebook presence. As Radio World reported, the Enforcement Bureau originally issued a notice of parent liability in April 2024 to Bellinger with a proposed forfeiture of $40,000, which stemmed from a Preventing Illegal Radio Abuse Through Enforcement, known as the Pirate Act enforcement sweep. He responded to the Commission after the notice was issued, seeking a cancellation of the forfeiture due to his inability to pay the forfeiture. The Commission reviewed Bellinger's financial information, and an agent from the Enforcement Bureau also confirmed the 93.1 FM signal is no longer on the air. As a result, the Commission opted for the consent decree, resulting in Bellinger's voluntary contribution. By entering the decree, the Commission said that Bellinger admitted that the facts underlying the Enforcement Bureau's description of the case are correct. Should his station come back on the air, or if he defaults on payment during the 20-year term of the decree, Bellinger agreed to a voluntary contribution of approximately $32,000, also payable to the U.S. Department of Treasury.
The transmission of radio signals of any kind was merely an experimental pursuit in Hungary until late 1925, and listening to radio over the air or having privately owned amateur equipment was forbidden. All of that was to change later that year with the start of the first Hungarian public radio broadcast on December 1st. 100 years later, amateurs in Hungary are celebrating Hungarian Radio Day, when radio was permitted there. 9 special call signs, all beginning with HG100, are on the air throughout December until the 31st, operated by amateurs from the Hungarian Radio Amateur Society and the Honfi József Radio Club. Contacts have been made since November 15th on CW, SSB, and the digital modes on 160 to 10 meters. The operators are also making use of the QO100 satellite. The Hungarian Radio Amateur Society website has a full list of the 9 call signs and more details about how to receive a commemorative certificate.
It's being heralded as a milestone in the long overdue evolution of speech quality for land mobile radio systems, the use of an adaptive neural network that replaces traditional signal processing. A digital voice milestone was announced at a recent acoustics and speech conference in California when the Free DV Project's David Rowe, Victor Kilo 5, Delta Golf Romeo, co-presented a paper describing a neural network that replaces traditional signal processing with machine learning. In a recent post on the FreeDV website, David called the development the first known real-world deployment of a neural codec, an important milestone that the ham community can be proud of. He and programmer Jean-Marc Valin presented the details to attendees at the IEEE Signal Processing Society conference, where David said it was well received. Instead of using the fixed algorithms of traditional digital voice, the FreeDV radio encoder, known as RAID V1, employs fully adaptive machine learning, producing a higher quality result developed using open-source software. Writing as a guest contributor to the Amateur Radio Digital Communications website in October, David noted that the technology provides unprecedented speech quality and robustness for VHF and UHF land mobile radio applications. The FreeDV project has been doing this work with grant support from ARDC.
It is time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from all over, and once again this week, they are real short. We begin with a press release from Amazon that is rebranding its Project Kuiper constellation of satellites in low Earth orbit. The program will now be known as Amazon LEO. There are now 153 Kuiper satellites in orbit intended to provide high-speed internet connections worldwide. Next comes word that 3 Chinese astronauts returned from their nation's space station Friday after more than a week's delay because the return capsule they had planned to use was damaged, likely from being hit by space debris. The team left their Shenzhou 20 spacecraft in orbit and came back using the recently arrived Shenzhou 21, which had ferried a 3-person replacement crew to the station, China's Manned Space Agency said. The original return plan was scrapped because a window in the Shenzhou 20 capsule had tiny cracks, most likely caused by impact from space debris, the space agency said Friday. SpaceX launched another batch of Starlink broadband satellites last week on a Falcon 9 rocket. It was the 94th orbital mission so far this year from Cape Kennedy, breaking 2024's record of 93 launches. A SpaceX executive said at a conference recently that he expects the company to finish the year with 165 to 170 Falcon 9 launches, which would also be a record. The total number of Starlink satellites launched so far in 2025 is 2,600, and the year's not yet over. And finally this week, Lambda Vision, a biotech company, has flown 9 missions to the ISS where it produced a 200-layer protein-thin film as a precursor to an artificial retina implants. Most recently, the company won a NASA Phase 2 In-Space Production Applications Award in September to continue developing the company's in-space manufacturing process, in this case, in partnership with microgravity research firm Space Tango.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
Recent months have seen space fans revel in a wealth of spectacular astrophotography depicting the evolution of Comet Lemon's glowing coma and twisting tail as it journeyed through a northern hemisphere night sky swarming with satellites. While many photographers opted to post sanitized views of Comet Lemon, others intentionally compiled their images to reveal the incredible number of satellites that crossed the night sky over the course of multiple exposures. Photographically, if someone is attempting to take a single image of a target and needs the image to be clean, free of man-made objects, well, that image is nearly impossible to obtain, astrophotographer Dan Bartlett told Space.com in an email. Every single subframe I take, prior to stacking, now contains at least one, and usually more than one, satellite streak. There are currently about 13,000 operational satellites orbiting Earth, of which about 8,900 are SpaceX Starlink craft. This number is set to exponentially increase, with SpaceX alone aiming to orbit up to 42,000 of its internet-beaming spacecraft, while competing companies aim to add thousands more satellites to their own mega-constellations. Astrophotographers combat satellite streaks by capturing a multitude of short exposures over the course of a single session. The images are then combined and subjected to an algorithm that determines a median value for each pixel before rejecting outlier pixels with values that exceed set parameters.
Finding older versions of particular software can be a real chore, all too often only made possible by the sheer grace and benevolence of their creators. At the same time, older versions of software can be the only way to dodge undesirable upgrades, track down regressions, do historical research, set up a retro computer system, and so on. This is where an archive like oldversion.com is or was incredibly useful, offering thousands of installers for software covering a number of platforms. Unfortunately, as noted on the website, they recently lost their main source of income in the form of Google advertising. This means that after launching in 2001, this archive may have to be shut down before long. Although these days we have sites like archive.org to do more large-scale archiving, oldversion.com is special for being focused and well-organized, along with a long and rich history that would be a shame to lose.
A network of repeaters is being created to expand digital amateur radio service in the state of Kansas with the help of a $14,000 grant from Amateur Radio Digital Communications. The network will be accessible to hams in 9 counties. The repeaters will operate on VHF and UHF and provide linkage over the Internet through the Yaesu Wires X, a system that provides even wider coverage. The network call sign will be K0HYS. 2 new repeaters will be established to connect with a repeater that's already in operation in Ellis County. The grant will be given to the Ellis County Amateur Radio Emergency Service Group and STEM Harvest Incorporated, an educational resource that focuses on helping people develop skills in technology.
Get ready for a major meteor shower next month and major meteor scatter radioactivity. Hams who played a part in the meteor scatter experiments conducted by AMSAT, Ham Radio Science Citizen Investigation, during the Perseids show this past August get another chance at action in the sky next month. The Geminids are coming. AMSAT's experiments for these meteor showers will take place on December 12th and 13th from 0000 to 2400 UTC. Operators are being asked to use MSK 144 on 50.260 MHz and 28.145 MHz. AMSAT reports that the Perseids show produced more than 70 logs and files for study, and the research group is hoping for similar results this time around. Hams are being invited to participate in the QSO party in what is once again described as a combination of a contest and a special event. Rules for the activity can be found at hamsci.org/MSQP. As the Hamsci website says, work the rocks, decode the pings.
You might not know it, but plans are currently in progress to launch a geostationary amateur radio satellite that would provide multi-mode communications coverage to Europe and most of North America. Future GEO is likely to be very similar to the QO100 satellite that covers Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, the large portion of Asia. The major difference, of course, would be the inclusion of North America within Future GEO's footprint, opening up geostationary satellite opportunities to one of the largest ham radio populations in the world. What that opens up is existing ham radio modes, analog and digital, utilized through an easily accessible stationary satellite. Beyond typical ham radio activities, QO100 supports high-definition video nets throughout the use of amateur digital TV. Imagine receiving amateur radio television with similar ease to that of DirecTV or Starlink. Read just about any mainstream news article about amateur radio, and it's inevitably framed as old technology that's kept alive by a dedicated few. Maybe satellite-based video conferencing or high-speed data transfers without the use of internet begins to change those old narratives. Based on current progress and the pace at which Q100 is implemented, we could see future GEO become reality within the next 4 or 5 years. For a proposed footprint that could cover most of North America, North American entities have largely been quiet, the exception being the formation of AMSAT Canada. AMSAT NA has relayed updates from the AMSAT DL and contributed to a proposal in 2023, but very little promotion has been published to their website. This is the most exciting active development in ham radio, and if this project interests you, you can promote it, present about it at an upcoming club meeting, or mention it on the air on the local repeater.
And finally this week. You've heard of Winter Field Day, and you've heard of the traditional ARRL Field Day held in the summer in the Northern Hemisphere. How about a Season Transition Field Day? One was just completed in India. As surely as autumn turns to winter in some parts of the world, radio operators are curious about the impact that seasonal changes are going to have on propagation. A recent extended field day operation by a group of 17 hams from the West Bengal Radio Club tracked those changes by getting on the air near the Earth's Tropic of Cancer. This was as much an academic exercise as a radio exercise, as two professors from nearby universities collected data over the 30-hour period to be used in their research. Ambaresh Nag Biswas, VU2 JFA, the club's secretary, said that Suman Partra from Jhargram University and Abakach Ghash from the Heritage Group of Institutions in the Kolkata are both studying disaster communications at the Indian Academy of Communications and Disaster Management. The pair hope that analysis of the data will show ways to improve the quality of emergency communications at this challenging time of seasonal change. The Tropic of Cancer was chosen because when it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere, the sun's rays are directly overhead. With the approach of winter, the sun is lower in the sky.
Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth for Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet. This Week in Amateur Radio is streamed on the Internet, broadcast on low-power FM, and heard on nets and repeaters all around the world, like the K2IWR repeater operated by the Skyline Amateur Radio Club on 147.180 MHz in Cortland, New York, where This Week in Amateur Radio is heard each Tuesday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to have your club's repeater announced on This Week in Amateur Radio, send us an email with all the pertinent information to w2xbs77@gmail.com.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.